Hi, my name is Lisa Richter. I'm the Director of Industry Outreach and Growth for CSIA. Welcome to the Masterclass. Before we get started, a quick word about CSIA. Probably most of you here today are familiar with the association, but if you are not, all you really need to know is that CSIA's mission is to help system integrators build better businesses. How do we do that? Well, for starters, we have a team of volunteer SIs who have crowdsourced a best practices manual to help system integrators scale their businesses. In fact, the Best Practice Committee released the latest manual, version 6.1, about a year and a half ago, and they are already planning for the next version. CSA also offers a certification program and other resources, including professional development, learning from peers, and access to vetted professional services companies, including financial, insurance, and legal, who understand the SI's unique business needs. Plus, CSIA is launching a new learning hub, which is an online platform with content and playlists that have been sourced and vetted by seasoned system integrators to help members get their teams up to speed quickly. Think of it like Spotify. All the content is there, but imagine having a personal DJ who spent over 20 years getting to know your preferences and tailoring the perfect playlist just for you. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow your SI programs, understand your customers' pain points, monitor industry trends, and share your thought leadership. With thousands of qualified integrators and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange helps system integrators, industry suppliers, and manufacturers connect and do business. For system integrators and partners, it provides a platform to support your content and SEO marketing efforts, position yourself as a thought leader, and nurture prospects during their complicated buyer's journey. If you are not currently a member, now is a great time to join. Membership provides you and your entire team a full lineup of virtual events and other resources, from accounting to sales to operations to training, 365 days per year. It also means you and your team can attend the CSIA conference, because this annual in-person event is members only. And as a reminder, if you are attending the conference, the welcome reception this year has a beachy theme, so bring your Hawaiian shirt and impress the crowd. If you are currently a member, thank you. If you want to just get a flavor of CSIA and its members, I encourage you to listen to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. CSIA members talk all things industrial automation, and it's just a great way to hear what your peers are up to. One last housekeeping note before I turn it over to today's speaker. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. That helps us stay organized. The session is being recorded, and you will get a link to the recording in the next day or so. At this time, I'm turning it over to today's speaker. Quentin, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So hopefully everybody can see that.
It looks like, there you go.
Finally come in. Sorry about that. So my name's Quentin Lowry. I'm with Softing. Today I'm going to talk to you about our tManager product. Specifically, we'll focus on our in-chassis control Logix. We do have two other flavors, one being a compact Logix and the other the IPC version, and we can go into that. But today's focus will be on the control Logix. It's the one we've had the longest, and the one that most people have probably heard of. So I have a really short PowerPoint. It's several slides. I'll just talk about what the tManager is, what it's capable of, how our customers are using it, kind of some of the unique aspects of the module, while some of the aspects that our customers like it for how it is. Then we'll get into an actual demo, and then we'll wrap up with the Q&A. And as Lisa referred earlier, if you have any questions as I'm going through this, just put them in the Q&A. We've allotted time at the end to be able to go through those and make sure we get your questions answered. But with that being said, this first part of the PowerPoint here shows kind of an application overview of what the tManager is used for. So in short, it's a hardware solution to connect data from your PLC to other systems. Mainly and traditionally, it's always been a SQL database, But more recently, we've had connections into the cloud via MQTT. And you can see we support a wide variety of databases. By far the most common is Microsoft SQL, but we also support Postgres, Oracle, MySQL, even older AS400. And so we can get into some of what customers are using it for. The module was first developed for the automotive industry. So for a track and trace application, as components get moved around on the production floor from one station to the other, those parameters would get recorded, telling whether it passed that specific station and the attributes that were put into that part there. At the end of the line, you could then run a check and say, hey, did this particular product pass everything it needed to? If yes, okay, go ahead and put it in the box. It also has, so that's what it was developed for. But as you can think about it, anything you're doing with data, hey, I want to get data out of my PLC and store it somewhere. You can do all sorts of that. So it's not specific to one industry, but a lot of our customers are pharma and food and bev, and that's just for the fact that the module is a hardware component that has built-in store and forward. So it's really integrated with the PLC that you get feedback written live. Hey, did that transaction happen successfully? Did we store that data? Think about things like I said that are regulated FDA, food and bev, but also stuff that's serialized. Sorry, that maybe for recalls or returns, you want to be able to go look up when that part was manufactured, all the values that were associated with it, and do tracking that way from a quality standpoint. So from our perspective and the module itself, there's not a particular industry or application where it shines. It's really anything, hey, I want to either get data out of the database and write it to the PLC, or store data from the PLC and write it to the database. So those applications I just mentioned are about storing the data, but think of somewhere like a lot of our customers will have a custom where they do custom manufacturing. So think about orders coming in with the customer's requirements. It could be anything. To store all those parameters in the PLC would be kind of cumbersome to do that. So they can have them stored in a database or some type of system in the cloud. The module, when the operator goes to manufacture that particular order, they can just put in the order number. The tManager goes into the database, looks up the parameters associated with that, and pulls it into the PLC. And so you could have thousands of different types of customized parts stored somewhere in the database. You don't have to worry about trying to store that in the PLC. So the module can actually go in, look that look that particular part up and its parameters for when they go to run the line. So you're offloading that data management into something that's meant to handle that. I've also seen customers that use this module to just automate things. So think about people coming in, like a carbon plant, for example. Customer comes in, it's got a badge number, scans the badge, his truck gets weighed, it goes to the next station. He gets filled up with the product, or carbon in this case. On the way back out, he scans his badge again and it gets weighed, and they know how much to charge that particular company by the weight of the product that they handled out. Whereas before they were doing that by just manually tracking it and trying to keep track of it that way. They automated that. So hundreds of different applications, lots of different use cases. Those are just some more common examples. Traditionally, customers have used VBA scripting or some type of scripting to do this in the past, or a software, even if it's a software that's built to do this. The tManager is different in that it's all built into the actual hardware itself. So I actually have one here. It's not the one that we're going to be demoing with, if I can get that blur. But the smarts, the drivers for both SQL and the PLC are built into the module, the configurations in the module. So I just use the software to configure it. I set the module to run, and then it takes on and does that, and I can disconnect. But you can see here, we query the PLC and ask it for its tags. It responds. We support UDTs, arrays, all the different Rockwell tag variable types. And then on the database side, we log into the database, we look at the tables, the views, and the stored procedures that we want to have access to. We pull a copy of that into the module. And once you've done both of those, you can simply set up the tags on the left-hand side and where you're wanting to send them to in the database on the right, and then under what conditions to do that. So it's really easy. It's meant for an automation engineer who doesn't know much about SQL to be able to come in here, set up something that's reliable, and really easy to configure and get that working. There's not a lot of coding or debugging or anything like that to be done with the module. And you also, with it being a hardware module versus a software solution, you're not managing an OS. You're not worried about somebody pushing an update to that PC and it messing things up. It is a embedded device. It's designed that way, so it's got the same it's designed for an industrial environment. It's got the same humidity and temperature ratings as Rockwell's components do. And we try to streamline those transactions to make it really easy for you all to configure them. Another benefit of the module being a hardware module is that it does have that built-in store and forward capability. And what I mean by that is, say we're talking to the PLC and it is some type of critical data that you can't lose. If the database was to go offline, you can still sit there and gather that data, and it stores it locally in the module itself. And then that way you're not having to halt the line or shut everything down and wait for the database to come back up. It can store all that locally in the module. Once the database comes online, it then does that and dumps it all to the database and brings everything up to date. So those are some of the main things to be aware of that's unique about the module itself. And you can monitor all that in the PLC. Like I said, so the tManager module can tell you, hey, we're successfully writing to the database, we're in store and forward. If we've had errors or anything like that, all that can be fed back to the PLC. So in some cases, we do have customers who are like, hey, throw this up on the HMI. If we go into a certain mode, the module also has SMTP capability. So if it does go into store and forward, it can actually send an email out and say, hey, we're in store and forward, and send that to the appropriate email addresses so that everybody's aware of what's going on for when your data is super critical. So I'll use this slide to talk about the differences and the three versions I mentioned briefly. We are demoing the ControlLogix version today, and we are focused on that. But do be aware we do have an IPC version. It talks to various types of controllers. So the ControlLogix, CompactLogix, Siemens, Modbus. And then we have our CompactLogix version, which is in the 1769 platform. It will communicate to the 5069 platform. It would just do that via being on the network with it. So you can take that guy, put a 1769 power supply with it, and put it on the network with your 5069 controllers, and it can go out to those and gather data from them. And it is only limited to CompactLogix controllers, so that is something to be aware of. But that's the main differences. The ControlLogix supports all the different PLC types, and it supports up to 16 controllers at once. The other two are limited in the amount. And then the CompactLogix specifically is limited to CompactLogix controllers. The ControlLogix also has backplane communication, whereas the other two talks via Ethernet IP to all the different PLCs. So that is something else to be aware of. The ControlLogix can actually pass through the bridge cards, and you can daisy chain different racks together, just like you do in RS links when you browse the network. So that is, you can have one ControlLogix module going out to a variety of Rockwell PLCs and gathering their data. And we actually did, we're just about to release a new Siemens driver. So we've had a Siemens driver for a while, but it wasn't as streamlined as the Rockwell driver. So we just gotta develop the new Siemens driver to where we can point it at the Siemens controllers, the 1200s and 1500s, and it'll auto browse those PLCs and pull in their tag structures like we do with Rockwell. So that's an improvement over the past, but it's something to be aware of. Other than that, they support the same type of SQL queries, the same type of SQL databases and connectivity to the cloud. They use the same user interfaces to configure them. They all have store and forward capabilities and handshaking with the PLCs and the databases. So it is just the limitation on those PLC types and the amount of PLCs that they're talking to. And with that, we're ready to get into the demo. Like I said, it's a really short PowerPoint. So my setup today is a ControlLogix tManager. We are going to talk across the backplane to the PLC that's in rack with it. We'll go out the front ports. So there are 2 front ports on the module. They do have to be isolated from each other. You can't put them on the same network. I don't know why you would in the first place, but they are gig-based Ethernet ports. So in my case, I have one going out to the public domain so that I can talk to AWS if we wanted to do that. It's also gathering its time via NTP, so a network time protocol server. So it periodically, every hour, goes out to that on the web and syncs its time with it. On the other network is where I actually have my PLC, my Studio 5000 software, and a local database. So that's just what the blue and the yellow lines designating there is the 2 different Ethernet networks tied into the tManager module. So I will pull this over here. So this is the tManager software. I'm logged in right now, but I'll log out. So you can see here, I can come into either one of those 2 Ethernet ports on the module. By default, port 1 is 192.168.1.250 on the current ControlLogix module. If I click that, it's going to prompt me for a username and password. So I will input that. It's just admin. And then we log into the module. So you can see it's not working very hard right now. That's because we don't have anything configured in it. CPU usage is just processor, flash storage. So this is where that store and forward memory is allocated from. You can see there's almost 10 gig worth there. Memory use, so there's 4 gig of RAM on this module. Get a drink, sorry. So I can set up a supervisory controller. That's a question that comes up often is, do I have to put this module in the IO tree of the controller? Do I need its EDS file? You do not. So especially with some of our customers that are regulated, maybe they've already passed a certification, they can't make changes to their programs. The module communicates very similar to how an HMI communicates. So it uses background comms. You can just point it at the PLCs, it'll make those requests and it'll get it in. You do not have to do anything in Logix to get this module working. So that is something to be clear of. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion there. However, if you do want to put it in the IO tree, it uses a generic AOP. If you do that, you can see here that it can get a supervisory controller, and that just gives you some status feedback and some controls to that tManager itself specifically. It's not needed, but it's definitely there. So you can see there's things like a free running counter that's down here. So that just lets you know, hey, is that module there? Is it working? You can send some basic commands, starting, stopping projects, do resets, do that from the PLC, and let you know if there's been errors or if data is went into store and forward. Like I said, it's not required, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Now, I'll try not to bore you to death with all the settings, right? But I will show you some of the main ones that customers use. And then we'll jump into actually setting one of these up and moving data around. So under network, obviously, if you were to get one, that's something you'd play with. Here's where the 2 Ethernet ports are configured. You can see we support DHCP or static. Any DNS servers or gateways, you can put them in here. Like I said, those two Ethernet ports do need to be isolated from each other. You can also do pings and trace routes from the module itself. So this isn't from the PC that's running the software, but it takes the actual path of the hardware module. Hopefully you don't need to use that, but it is useful for troubleshooting if you're trying to talk to a PLC that's on a different network, or you're trying to talk to SQL and you're having issues connecting. It's nice to know, hey, can I at least reach this thing? Time management. So this is actually where I have that time sync set up. So in this case, you don't have to set up a source. I do recommend it. Because if you don't have it and there's a power outage, when it comes back up, it's not going to have an accurate time. Whether you're using that to send timestamps to the database, or if you're just looking at logs, it can be confusing. So in my case, it's going out to this NTP server. It can also sync its time with the PLC that it's in rack with. So if you already have some type of time mechanism that's setting the time in your PLC and you want the tManager to just sync off of that, you can set it up. The module can also push time to the PLC. So if I wanted to, I could say, hey, get your time from this NTP server and then update the time in the PLC as well. You can tell it how often you want it to do this, set the time zone, and you're good to go. So I do recommend doing that. I'll use this to talk about licensing. Typically, when you order a module, it has license for everything that you need. However, when you would bump into an additional licensing, say you want to have two different database types, I want to talk to Oracle and Microsoft SQL, well, that would be an additional charge. You can't order a module without a license. So I do bring that up because there is a licensing tab and people look at it and they're like, what is this? But that is something to be aware of, is that if you are wanting to talk to multiple different database types, not multiple databases, but multiple database types, you would need an additional licensing. There's system and audit logs. Those can be exported if you wanted to keep a permanent record of that. We do have some of our more regulated customers who keep an audit log. So they have record for everything that's ever taken place on the module, and that can be exported as those fill up. We do come out with updates when we add features like this Siemens driver I referenced earlier that we're revamping or have improved. That would be in a firmware update. To get that, those are available on the website. They're free to download. So it's just something to be aware of. We do occasionally have bug fixes as well. You can create different usernames and passwords for the module. This is for this specific module. You can actually also restrict access to certain users if you wanted to do that. So sometimes we'll have customers who are OEMs who will have the unique username and password for themselves. Their end customer may have a different username and password. You can also restrict access to certain users. So if you wanted somebody to be able to come in and view things but not actually alter or edit them, you can do that here. It's not used often. Most of the time, people get this module in, they set it up just like a PLC. Hey, everything's working. My data's moving how I want it to. And then they leave it alone. They set it and forget it. So that is something to be aware of. But unless you're in an environment where you have multiple people interfacing with a module at once or working on different aspects of it, typically you're not going to use that. So projects, this is what everybody cares about. It's like, hey, let's set this thing up. How do we make it work? How do we actually move data around? So you need a project. So I'll click new. We'll just put in CSIA here. You can see it populated there. Now I'll double click on this and it's going to open up the project editor, put it on my other screen. So I'll move it over here. So there it is. So this is the project editor. You can see we're logged into the CSIA project. You can see I have a controller button, a database application button, and then transactions. So we will set up our connection to the controller. We'll set up our connection to the database. And then once we've done those, we can set up our transactions between the two. So if I click on controller, define controllers, I already have this one defined, but let me delete that. So if this was brand new out of the box and you put it in a rack and you click define controllers, it'll show you what's in rack with it. So you can see my modules in slot 2. This is a 4-slot rack. I don't have anything in the 4th slot, but it shows you, hey, there's a PLC in slot 0, a bridge card in slot 1. And so you can notice that they're a different color. They're not this gray. Well, that just means, hey, we can access those things. So if I wanted to configure the module that I'm in rack with, I simply right click on it, click configure the selected module. It defaults to the project name within the controller. If you wanted to change that to a particular line item, particular machine, you can do that here. You hit OK, should turn green. It does. That just means, hey, we requested the tag structure from that controller and got it. So now I can right click on it, hit open tag list, and you can see here's our controller and program tags. And you can see within the UDTs, you can dive down to all the different levels of that. We support that in the arrays. Now, if I was going to go out the bridge card, I could say connect to a new module on this network, pick the flavor. We support the older stuff as well. So that's really useful in some cases. And if it was just to another bridge card, if I wanted to daisy chain those racks together, I could do that by selecting that. If I wanted to just talk to another PLC that's on the network with that bridge card, I can do that. So the module would actually go across the back plane, out the front ports of the bridge card itself, and talk to those. You can also see here's our other drivers for going out the front ports of the tManager module itself. From there, since we do have a PLC connected, we can go to the database, go new to database application. In my case, I'm just demoing with SQL Express. So Microsoft SQL, input the IP address. The port number, if you haven't changed it by default, it's 1433. You put in the database name and then a username and password. We do use SQL Server authentication to connect to that. I can hit validate. That lets me know, hey, I can actually log into that module with those credentials. That's good. From there, much like we did on the PLC where we looked at that tag structure and pulled it in, to do that with a database, I hit enumerate database. I can see with my user that I logged into what access I have. So sometimes we get like automation guys pitching this to their IT group and they're like, we don't want to give you access to everything on the database. It's like, okay, then don't. Like create a user that only has access to the table that you want. Or if you don't want us writing directly to a table, I've had it in cases where the database admin creates the stored procedure for the module to interface with. So he vets that program, that stored procedure is essentially just a program on the SQL, and he puts in the checks that he wants on the data and everything. And so the module just writes to that stored procedure, and then he takes the data out of that and stores it directly in the tables that he wants and does what he wants with it. So they can restrict access to the module to however they want it configured. So that is something to be aware of. In my case, this user has access to everything. So I say select all, I hit OK. And then from there, I have my tables, my views, and my stored procedures. So I'll say select all. And this just is looking at those names, those table names, looking at the column types, the variable types of those columns. For the stored procedures, it's the input and output parameters and their types, and it pulls all that into the module so that we can do the drag and drop GUI. So I've done that. I'll close those out. Now we can set up a transaction. Before we do that, we'll look in Logix. So obviously I'm not running a line or anything like that, right? But I do have this production count tag and pass count tag. It's just a counter, increments every 2 seconds. We're just going to say, hey, this is like getting a new product in every 2 seconds. Every time that happens, we want to store data to the database for each one. So then if we were to look at the database, you can see we have this work in process table. It has a column for an operator, a timestamp for when that data was stored, a cycle time, line number, pass count, fail count, and production count. If I execute this, I have nothing in here right now. So that's what we're going to populate. So to do that, I go to transaction. When we store data to a database, it's called insert. So we do an insert transaction. We're inserting data to the database. I click that. You can connect to multiple databases, as I said. In this case, I've only defined the one, so that's my only option. Select table. So if I go to that work in process table, I select it. It's asking me, hey, do you want to pull in all that complete schema, that full structure of the table, all those columns? I say yes. So it auto populates that in there for me. I can then click on my controller tags. I only have the one controller defined, but if I had multiple, then I would have had the option to pick other ones. And then I can simply just drag and drop this in here. So we try to keep it real easy. You can see I have names in here that match the column names in the table. So I can take that, populate them. If I had them all together, I could actually shift highlight and drag this whole thing in at once if I wanted to. If I wanted to do the top level of the UDT and do that as well, I can. The whole key to all this is just, hey, I'm taking, as you can see here, an integer in the PLC and writing it to a 32-bit integer in the database. So the database doesn't support 16-bit integers, and you'll see that when we connect. That's going to give us a conversion warning. But so I have a timestamp. It's a date time column in the database. If I want to take the timestamp that the tManager module has, which in my case, it's syncing with the NTP server, so it has a time source. That's a good idea to do that. So I click that there. I can also add constants. I have function blocks. So if I need to manipulate the data back and forth, do some conversions on it before sending it to the database, or if I'm getting it out of the database, like from a date time column, and I want to write it to a string in the database, I can do that. There's function blocks that do that. But in my case, I'm just going to do a constant. I'm going to put my name in there. And you can see I've lined these all up nice and clean. If I hadn't, I could just click and connect those. But in my case, since I lined them up, I can simply hit this button. It does it for me. So we've defined the table that we're writing in the database. We're saying these are the PLC tags we want to write to that table. Under what conditions does this take place? When does this transaction fire? Well, I said earlier that we want to do it based off getting a new product in. And I'm going to use that production count tag to do that. So I come down here. And sorry, I kind of skipped over that. I click trigger. So the trigger is what initiates this transaction. I click new trigger, and you can see right here that this says, hey, every scan period, evaluate the condition. If the condition's true, we send the data. The trigger evaluates as true and we execute. If it doesn't evaluate as true, then we don't send the data. So you're not just constantly blasting data regardless, just on a setup time frame. You can actually put some logic in there, build it into your PLC of, hey, when this tag evaluates as a 1, when it changes its value, if it's a Boolean, when we go from a 0 to 1 and you want to fire on that rising edge, that's when we want to send the data. So that's built into the module and you can utilize that. In this case, we're going to monitor this production count tag. And this is just saying, hey, every second, check this tag. If its values changed from the last time we checked it, execute the transaction. So I hit OK. Like I said, there's lots of options and conditions there, but that's a pretty common one and a simple one to use. So I selected it. I need to hit apply. Now you can see we can start and stop the appliance as a whole. So that's everything in the module. If I had multiple projects, I can start and stop individual ones. So I need to start this project. Under transaction management, I click that and I can start and stop individual transactions as well. So here's the trigger that's looking at that production count tag. It's not actually scanning or anything yet because I haven't started it. This is where we're sending the data to is Microsoft SQL endpoint 1. You can see it's listed right there. So that's that table. I need to start that endpoint. And I need to start this trigger. And so it'll turn green. You can see, hey, we're scanning it every second. It's changing every 2 seconds. So that's toggling up. And we should be writing data to the database. There's also lots of stuff here, like how many, if this was default, how many messages are in the store and forward queue, how much of the store and forward queue is full. There's all types of settings, but I'm trying to keep it at a high level. You get the speeds on how fast everything's running, right? So on average, this transaction's taken 28 milliseconds, and that's to the database and back. You can see the database has taken 12 to 13 milliseconds to respond. So all that good info is there. I can click this button. This is just a one shot. So that's a, hey, this is the data that was fired when that one shot executed. If I wanted to watch that, it's just a nice little debug feature. Maybe you don't have access to the database or the PLC and you're trying to see what data was written, but we do. So we can go over here, we can execute this query again. You can see we've populated 38 rows of data. You can see our timestamp on when that's happening. Like I said, every 2 seconds. You can see the values that were entered. So we're firing off this production count changing. And you can see it just goes through there in increments. It's really easy to configure. So with that being said, maybe you want to monitor in the PLC whether this is a successful transaction or not. You can do that by coming into the trigger. You can see you can have one trigger for multiple transactions, but in this case, it's only linked to DB insert 1. So if I want to monitor that feedback, hey, I want to write that it was successfully written to the database into the PLC. I want to update a value in the PLC to let the PLC know that it was successful. You can come right here, click on that, hit edit. I have a status trigger basic tag, it's just an integer tag. I right click on it since I'm going to be writing a value to it from the tManager. Make it writable. Pull that in here, hit OK. And so this means that, hey, when we're successfully writing to the database, I'm going to write a value of 30 to that tag. If we were to fault or go into store and forward, we'll write a 20 that we're in the store and forward queue. If it was the fault or the queue was to fill up and we started dropping messages, we'd write a 101. So to show you that, I'll save that off. I do need to restart that trigger since I made changes to it. And everything should be running again, but we'll check. Yep, so once I made changes to that reset the counter on that guy. But if we come over here, we should see that the status trigger basic tag's a 30. If I was to reset that to a 0, next time it executes, it's writing a 30. And so that's just the value that the developers picked. All that's described in a help document and in a knowledge base article. So for instance, if I wanted to fault it and make it go into store and forward, I should simply come in here and stop this. And you can see we have messages in queue. So if we go back and look at our tag, it should be 20, and 20 just means, hey, we're in the store and forward queue. If I reset that to a 0, it's going to write a 20 because we're no longer hitting the database. So I can simply, you can also see this. If we come over here, you can see, hey, and this is just a 1 megabyte queue, right? It's pretty small. It could be hundreds of megabytes. You can see that in our AOP, the data in store and forward bits turned on. You also get it in that handshake tag, which is the best way to monitor it because it's live. But you can also see how much of the store and forward queue is being used and how many messages are in there. If I was to start this, you'll see it'll dump it fairly quickly. So it cleared that out. That status tag should now be a 30 because we're successfully writing to the database again. And you can monitor this not only on storing data to the database, but like when you're doing a select or stored procedure as well. So to do that, maybe we'll see data come back around, and then I'll wrap up and see what all we got going on in the Q&A or the chat. But to do a select to get data out of the database or a stored procedure, sorry, I can come in here and do new transaction and updates where we're going into the database and we're actually just updating values in it. Select is when we're pulling data out of it, and a stored procedure, like I said earlier, has got inputs and outputs. It can be anything that you've coded in there. So to just do a simple way of getting data back out of the database, maybe for recipe management, we'll do a new database select transaction. Pick our database again. In this case, we're going to look at the auto table. It's asking me if I want to copy the complete schema again. In this case, no, I don't want to, and we'll look at why. So I'll say show table. We don't want the RFID and we don't want the temp ID. We just want these. So I'm going to shift highlight and bring those in. And then on the controller tags, I have a car UDT. Since I'm going to be writing to these tags, I need to right click on them and make them writable. I'll show you the error you get if you don't. So if I bring it in here, try to dump it, saying, hey, you can't do that. These tags aren't writable. So if I come over here, right click, make tag writable, I can now pull them in. Since they're lined up all clean again, I can hit this button. Notice here that this could be an array. So if I had arrays defined, like for instance, right here, I did it again, make tag writable. I have an array defined right here. If I wanted to take all the records out of a table and write them to an array in the PLC, I could do that. So you just need to have arrays defined in the PLC to be able to handle that. I'm not doing that with this example, but be aware that we do have customers that do that. They'll pull like thousands of records at once. It's actually for, you can view it as a CNC machine. It's not, it's actually wrapping items as they come in, but it's the XYZ coordinates for particular items. So they pull all that into the PLC so that it knows how to do that as it comes in. So that's a use case for that, but I'll remove it. In this case, I'm only writing to flat tags, so just one record at a time. So for max rows, I put 1. I need to tell it how to look up data. So maybe we'll look at the database table in question. So with this example, you can see in the PLC, I have a RFID, a model, paint type, paint level, oil type, and oil volume. We're going to toggle a value in the PLC for RFID. When the module sees that value changed, it's going to come in and say, hey, this changed to a 3. Let's get model, paint type, paint level, oil type associated with RFID 3. So it'll pull in Volvo 2001. When it changes to a 5, it'll pull in Volkswagen, 7, Honda, etc. So it's kind of like recipe management. Hey, I put in a particular part number, particular order number. Give me all the parameters associated with that. So to do that, we have a where clause. So it says, where do we want to look up the data? So in this case, I want to look up the data based off the RFID column, where it is equal to the value of my tag, my RFID tag in the PLC. So like I said, when it's a 3 in the PLC, we're going to say, what's the data where it's equal to a 3 in the database? Now we need to give it its own trigger, otherwise it would just fire constantly. In this case, we'll use the same type of trigger and we'll say monitor the RFID tag. Select that, hit apply. And you notice that other transactions continue to run. Even though I'm online making changes, we haven't had to halt anything. So I need to start my automation endpoint because this time we're going to write data back down to the PLC and start that trigger again. So it should start monitoring it, but it's not going to do anything until I go in there and manually change it. So if we come to the car UDT, so if I did everything right and everything started, when I change this to a 1, it should pull in Toyota if I'm not mistaken, and it does. I think we said 7 was Honda. And so you can see me just simply coming in here, we'll change that value. If it was a real RFID scanner, somebody types something in or scans something, sees that it changes, go looks that up in the database and pulls it back in. And so I think that's a really good overview. There's stored procedure queries. There's lots of other things and aspects of the module that can be configured for redundancy and failover, just to ensure there's no data loss. But that's a good starting place here. And I will see if we got any Q&A or what we have going on over here. So let me see this. So in the Q&A, some of the first questions and one of the most common ones we get, are there plans to update the Compact Logix version to the 5069 platform? Yes, there are plans for that. We're working on some other 5069 modules right now that are in front of that. And so one of them is actually on the website. We're working on like a 5069 device net scanner, and we're doing some other modules as well. But to answer your question, yes, there is plans for a 5069 tManager platform. I don't have a timeline for it or anything. I know they've looked at some initial designs of what that hardware would be like, but we don't have prototypes or anything like that. So it's still a while out. So I'll say I answered that live. How much capacity and data can the device store for the store and forward feature if the connection's lost? So that's a good question. So let me come back in here to edit. And if I go to database, hopefully I'm still sharing my screen. I think I am. So if I come into this particular endpoint, there's a store and forward tab. Each transaction can have 200 megabytes of data. So each one can allocate 200 megabytes. You can see, hey, if that was to fill up, do I want to get rid of the oldest or the newest data that's in there? If maybe you don't care about your data after it's a day or two old, it'll just roll off in the store and forward queue as well. But those settings are configurable here. So each transaction can have 200 megabytes and you can build that up. There's also failover. So if you had a secondary database and you're like, hey, the primary is not there, I want to fail over to the secondary, the tManager will do that as well. Let's get that live. If you use a built-in transaction such as a DB insert, can you configure custom return values such as unique feedback for duplicate record found, failure, and successful insert, or would that need to be done with a stored procedure? You can't. So on the database side, you can put some of those rules on the table. Like if you have a unique ID and you want to make sure it's not duplicate on the database side, there's ways you can do that on the table. However, to answer your question about the tManager module itself, that is not built into the module. You'd probably be better off doing, or you would do that with a stored procedure to answer your question. So that would be the way to do that. Brian Young asked if you can customize the SQL statements being executed. You cannot customize the insert, update, or select. We would say you need to code a stored procedure that does what you want, and then we would just execute that, whatever it looks like. Whatever you're trying to do would be the way to do that. Something else to go over is how fast can it run. So the trigger types are what defines that. So the lowest you can set the scan period is 250 milliseconds. However, if you want to get under that, you can actually do what's called event. And this is where a message instructions sent from the controller itself to the tManager, and it's telling it when to fire. I have customers that run in tens of milliseconds, if not lower than that, with that setup. The key with all this about speed is that depending on how your handshake's set up and how fast your database is responding, if your database is really slow and we're just blasting it, your connection's probably going to drop or time out. So that is something to be aware of. It's not just what the module's capable of. Obviously, the more you load the module up and how much data it pushes per transaction is going to slow things down as well. So that is something to be aware of. That's something I would cover. Let me close that out. That's a good question. Another thing to talk about that comes up is there redundancy? How can you build in redundancy with the module? So the modules cannot function in Rockwell redundant racks. You would just have the module in a third rack. And when the redundancy takes over, the module doesn't know the difference because it sees it as IP addresses. Now, if you're worried about redundancy as far as the tManager itself, you can using the supervisory controller, you could have two tManager modules and let a controller tell one to fire up. If it sees that the other one's free running counter was to drop or not come on, you could have identical tManagers and have the PLC itself be checking that counter. If it's not there, start the other module. With that being said, something I didn't cover that should be covered. There's transaction configuration and then there's complete appliance. So, hey, how do I save my work off from a tManager module? Everything I've configured when I click login, everything I'm doing is configuring the solid state drive on that module. So if it was to lose power and come back up, it comes back up in the same state that it went down on. Same thing for if data is in the store and forward queue and we were to lose power, when it comes back up, that data is still in the store and forward queue. With that being said, I didn't upload or download a project or anything like that. So how do you save your work off? How do I create backups? What do I do in case this module gets damaged? You can do complete appliance backups, which is IP addresses, username, passwords, all the settings, the MPT server, all that stuff, as well as all the transactions and the configurations of the PLCs and databases. The transaction configuration is just the project side. So just the configurations of the PLCs and the databases and what that looks like. And we have customers that use both of those, but that is something to be aware of. Is if you were to configure one of these, please save that off in case something happened. I've had them where pipes burst and all kinds of things. So that is something to be aware of as well. And with that being said, if we don't have any more Q&As, I'm going to hand that back over to Lisa. And thank you all for your time. I'm going to stop my share now.
Thank you, Quentin.
Thank you.
On behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank our speaker, Quentin, for this presentation. I would also like to thank Softing for sponsoring the event, and of course, thank you for attending. Be sure to bookmark the CSIA events calendar so you don't miss any upcoming events. And that's a wrap. Once again, thanks for joining us and have a great day.